Hello and welcome to Lecture 2A, where today we'll be talking about selections and how to modify them. There are a whole lot of tools to make selections in Photoshop. That is, one of the prime tools or reasons to use Photoshop is to select pixels. It's difficult to make edits to specific pixels if you can't first point out which pixels you want to edit. So these are going to cover some of the ways that you can make those selections in Photoshop. This is an overview. This is meant to simply just supplement or introduce your reading, so be sure to do that and follow along with the activities there to get more information. The selection tools in Photoshop are broken into three groups. There's the marquee tools, the lasso tools, the magic wand family of tools as well. Now those are the tools. There are other techniques or ways to make selections in Photoshop besides this that are more advanced, but these are the simple tool-based or mouse or touchpad version of the tools to make selections with. So a couple of things to be aware of. First off, the marquee tool group. You've got rectangular and elliptical marquees, and those do what they say. They make rectangles or squares and ellipses or circles. And then the single row and single column marquee tools, those make just a single row of pixels or column of pixels in a selection. And I'm sure there's a use for that, but I have yet to figure out a good one. So we'll focus mainly on the rectangular and elliptical marquees. We'll look at some examples here in a minute. There are the lasso family of tools, and these are more freehand versions of selections. Rather than making a shape-based selection, you can freehand completely with the lasso tool and just draw your selection outright. This works a lot better if you're using a tablet where you can draw with a pencil format, or if you're really good hand-eye coordination, you can do it with the mouse too, of course. Polygonal lasso tool, I have to slowly say that one or I mess it up every time, is my favorite one of the lasso tools because it allows you to click and then let go, and the next place you click, it's going to do a connecting line between the two. So if I want to draw a square, I can draw a square by just clicking 4 times. I can draw whatever shape I want, and I can actually do a nice clean curved line by making a whole ton of little clicks close together, and I can trace pretty well doing that. Polygonal lasso tool works great for that. Magnetic lasso tool takes it a step further, and this one is image-based. It uses Photoshop's understanding of contrast and sharpness and pixels and color to drop that magnetic line like it's sticking to areas of contrast. So if I were to, I should have a demonstration here, but if I were to make a selection around this big box, this screenshot in the middle of the screen, as long as I click somewhere close to the border of that and then move my mouse in a line somewhere close to the edge, it's going to jump that selection line right to that border. There's a lot of contrast between that gray and that white background. If I have a fuzzy, furry animal, it's going to be not quite so accurate. If I have fine hair detail or a tree with lots of leaves, then it's going to be a lot trickier too. So there are other better ways to do it, but magnetic lasso tool will get you in the ballpark for a lot of simple selections, and it can be pretty quick. Try these out. The only way you're going to get good at them and be really understanding of what they do is to use them. So give yourself little tasks to try them out. The book will have some in those activities. Some of that may be incorporated in your technical project and creative project, but really, you got to try these out to get familiar with them. So give yourself something to select. Find an image online, download it, play around with it, try each version of these tools and see which one you prefer the best and what works best for what sort of things. The wand group has the magic wand and the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool is a newer addition to the tool-based selection techniques, and it's pretty good. There are some features that you can turn on or off and adjust in the options bar to give you different results. Same thing with the magic wand tool. But quick select, basically you're painting in an area that you want selected, roughly, and you're teaching Photoshop what are the things you want to select that are similar to that. So, for example, if I were to try to select the sky in a photograph, I could paint on just a small portion of the sky, or even if it's a solid blue sky, just draw a line across an open area of the sky, and that selection is going to jump to fill all the similar areas that are like that. It uses Adobe's Content Aware technology, and it's pretty good. Making multiple selections, changing your brush size with that will give you better results. You can also add and subtract from your selection to better teach Photoshop what to look for in your current selection. And this may sound like gibberish right now, but you got to try it out to have it make sense. Make selections using the quick select tool, and it'll be pretty intuitive, I think, how that works. But pressing Alt on the keyboard or Option on a Mac will subtract from your selection. So if I were in that example selecting a sky and I accidentally cross a tree that's in the horizon, basically I'm telling Photoshop include things that are similar to that in this selection, and it's going to screw up the whole thing to a certain extent. I can hold down Alt and I can paint out that tree out of my selection, and it's going to teach Photoshop to be more specific as far as what I want included in that sky selection, what I don't. Magic Wand is kind of the little brother of the quick selection tool. It's been around for a while. It's earned the nickname of the Tragic Wand tool. As you can imagine, there are some negative connotations there. The Magic Wand is, again, looking for areas of similarity in your image. The options bar is going to have a lot of settings that you can do to refine or improve the selection quality using the Magic Wand. But it works great for things that are similar. You specify the tolerance, meaning how much difference between pixels do I want to include in the selection. So let's say I'm taking a photo of the sunset and it's got this wide variety of colors in the sky. The clouds are one color, the sky is another. Close to the horizon, it's dark orange, and up further away, it's purple. There's a lot of variety there. You're going to have a difficult time selecting the entire thing with the Magic Wand tool. Because if I specify a certain tolerance, like the default 32, that means 32 levels of contrast in between what I select and what I didn't click on is going to be included in that selection. There's going to be a lot more variety in tones and colors than just 32 levels in that sunset picture that I described. So again, try this out. Open up a photograph, use the Magic Wand tool, try it out, and see how that works out for you. It does work really well for some things. Sometimes not so much. So all of these selection tools are really just that. They're tools. If you are a carpenter or a mechanic or whatever, you know that you need to use the right tool for the job. And it's never just one tool. You use multiple tools. Certain things are going to require a combination of Magic Wand, lasso, marquee, and so on to get an accurate selection and get the things that you want included. Don't ever think that you're going to be able to just use one thing and get a perfect selection every time. That unicorn is very rarely something that you'll see in Photoshop. So more types of selections. These are not selection tools, but these are menu options that you can find. The first two anyhow, color range and focus area. The screenshot shows you the color range dialog, just to give you an idea of what this does. With the eyedropper tool, that tiny little eyedropper, I don't know if you can see that, on the left bottom butterfly wing, is sampling a color. In this case, the blue of the butterfly wing. If I click on that, that tells Photoshop, select all the other colors that are similar within a certain range. And I can adjust the fuzziness or the range to include more blues or fewer blues or brighter blues or darker blues and so on. And I'm making a selection based on color. It's very powerful, very accurate, and you can do a lot with a color range selection if you learn how to refine that. The little eyedroppers that you see on the right-hand side of that dialog, there's the first one on the left and the one that I have selected with the plus, the one on the right with the minus. Those are adding to or subtracting from the color palette that's being included in your selection. So if I want to include more variety of blues, I would click around several times with that plus, and it's going to add more blues to my selection. Also, an easier way to do that is just hold down Shift on your keyboard and drag across all the colors that you want to select. And that's going to get them all. And you see that's a pretty effective way to do it. If I accidentally clicked on the white background, that's going to screw up the color palette that I'm using for my selection. And in that case, I would just click on the minus eyedropper or hold down Alt or Option on the keyboard and click again on the white, and it's going to subtract that from my color palette. Now, focus area is similar. It uses the image itself to make a selection, but Photoshop is, this is a new selection technique that, honestly, it works on certain images really well, but on a lot of them, it's not terribly useful. If you've ever seen a picture, a portrait, for example, where the background is really blurry and out of focus, but the person is sharp, that's where this kind of thing excels. If you have something in focus and other things that are very definitely not in focus, Photoshop can determine based on sharpness and contrast what's in focus and what's not, and make a selection based on that. I'll leave it to you to play around with it and experiment, and feel free to look up YouTube videos or lynda.com videos. There's a ton of material you can find on that. Now, making selections with channels is a more advanced topic. We'll get into that at a later date, but just be aware that, again, with our channels, we have red, green, and blue in an RGB image, or we have cyan, yellow, magenta, and black in a CMYK image. We can use the contrast between those channels to make selections based on color or luminosity or brightness. Very powerful ways to make selections using channels, but we'll get to that at a later date. So, making selections is a pretty basic, straightforward task, but often just a simple circle or rectangle is not enough to get it. You need to modify those selections, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. So when you're on any of those selection tools, you'll see in the options bar those 4 icons that I have in the red rectangle. And if you put your cursor over those, it'll give you a little tooltip that shows you what they do. But the icon might give you a little clue as well. The one that my mouse is over on the far right now is intersect. That means if I were to draw a rectangular marquee, for example, and then switch to the intersect mode and then draw another one that overlaps it, it's going to delete all of the selection except for the area where they intersect. So I can make more complex shapes doing that, obviously, than I can with just a single instance of one of those tools. Subtract, self-explanatory. I hope, overlapping areas between the 2 selections, it's going to erase. And add is going to add the 2 selections together. So you can make more complex selections, shapes, using these modes. Down below, there's a couple of tips. So this I didn't put the text on there. I need you to just remember that and try it out and get familiar with it. But there are some modifier keys that work like little magic features for all kinds of things within Photoshop. And if you don't know if whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish has one of these features built in, just try it out. It won't hurt. You can always undo. But those keyboard shortcuts, press one of these keys while you're doing something, and usually you'll find some surprising thing that it does that helps you out. Those are Shift and Alt. Alt especially is my favorite because it has all kinds of little magic features throughout all kinds of places in Photoshop. Anyhow, in this example, I've got 2 elliptical marquee selections, and you notice that they're both perfect circles. Those blue lines that you see are just guides that I put down there so that you could see the boundaries of my marquee selections on a white Photoshop slide background. And the red arrow I added to show you where I clicked to begin and where I finished clicking to end my marquee selection. So in the left-hand graphic, you'll see the arrow starts at the very top right, or left, I'm sorry, and goes and ends at the very bottom right. So I clicked at the top left and dragged down all the way to the bottom right while holding down Shift. That's important. So holding down Shift locks the aspect ratio to a perfect circle, or if you're on the rectangular marquee, it makes it a perfect square. That's an important thing to remember because try this out in Photoshop, but if you don't hold down Shift and try to make a perfect circle or a square, it can be tricky. And it's not that it's impossible, it's just time consuming and annoying. So Shift is the first of those magic little keys that you should remember and try for all kinds of things, especially for marquee selections. The next, in this case, on the right-hand side, I used a combination. You don't have to use these in combination, but in that case, I pressed Alt and Shift. So because I held down Shift still, it locks the aspect ratio. I ended up with a perfect circle. Because I held down Alt, I click in the center, and my marquee grows from that point equally. So hopefully that's clear with the graphic, but you just try this out in Photoshop, and it'll instantly make sense. When you make a selection holding down Alt, your marquee spreads out from the point where you first started. If you don't hold down Alt, then you get what you see on the left, where you click at the top left and your marquee ends up inside of an invisible bounding box, starting with wherever you began and end. Sometimes that is confusing when you're making a circle to know where the boundaries are. In this case, I would have to click about 1/4 inch up and to the left to make a circle in a specific place. If I want to hold down Alt, I just click in the center of where I want my circle to be and then expand out from there. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, like I said, try it in Photoshop and it'll be clear as soon as you do. All right, so again, modifying your selections is an important thing, and there are many, many ways to modify your selections. We're getting through these bit by bit, but again, I can't emphasize this enough. You got to try this stuff out in Photoshop. Just doing what's in the textbook is good, But give yourself little projects, just simple stuff. Just open up and follow along in Photoshop. Make some selections and see what I'm talking about as we're going. Pause the video. Go do that. I'll wait. Okay, I assume you paused it and we're back in Photoshop now. So if you have a selection, currently existing selection, and you look under the select menu, you'll see this option to modify won't be grayed out. If you don't have anything selected, then it won't be there. The flyout menu for that shows border, smooth, expand, contract, and feather. And I'll let you play with those again too, but just to give you a sampler, feather, for example, is going to blur the edges of your selection. So gradually I can say, let's say I make a 100 pixel wide rectangular marquee selection. I've got this rectangular square that's 100 pixels wide and it's sharp edges. It's 100% selected. And then as soon as I cross that marching ant border, it's 0% selected. Feather makes a transition based on whatever value I enter. I can say I want that to be 20 pixels, feather. What that means is that, let's say I have my original 100 pixel selection. Hopefully this math, you can follow along with me here, but 10 pixels inside that boundary instead of at the very edge. So at 90 pixels now, it's going to start transitioning to where it's not 100% selected anymore. Over the course of the next 20 pixels out, it's going to go from 100 down to 0. So we've got 20 pixels of transition where it's partly selected. This may not make sense when you do it in Photoshop looking at the marching ants, but when you try it out, hit Q on the keyboard. That's going to switch you over to quick mask, which we'll talk about later, but press Q. That's going to show a visual representation of your selection. You'll see that your border of your selection becomes fuzzy. So that's all feather is. You're blurring the edges of your selection using a specified value. And that's how you do it, is using the modify feather command. That's if you want to modify an existing selection. You can obviously apply a feather beforehand using the options panel before you start to draw your selection when you're on any of those selection tools. Okay. Border, smooth, expand, and contract. I'll let you play around with those. Some of them, the names give it away. Some of them you might have to play around with a little bit. Grow is kind of like expand, but it behaves a little bit differently. Try it out. Similar is one I honestly never use because there are other ways to do the kind of the same thing. But basically, if I make a selection that includes a bunch of white pixels and I click similar, it's going to look throughout the image and any other white pixels that are touching that, it'll select them too. If there are also some gray pixels in that image, it may not get them, but if I click similar again, it's going to expand that similarity search basically and include more of those pixels and so on. I can eventually end up selecting the entire image if I click it enough. Transform gives you handles on your selection, your marquee, so that I can resize that. That comes in really handy to make it fit to an object or a shape or whatever in your image that isn't a perfect square, circle, or ellipse, or rectangle. Very handy to make customized selections that way. You can do the same thing a lot easier sometimes using the polygonal lasso tool, for example, but being able to transform a selection is a handy thing to know. So just be aware that that is there, and this is under the select menu. To finish up, I'm just going to give you a little overview real quick of layer masks. We're not going to get into those, but in this lecture, we'll get into them a lot further on. This is something that when you do your projects, if you've made selections of things, if you've erased backgrounds out of photos or whatever else you're doing and you didn't use a layer mask, it's probably going to be something that you lose points on. So just giving you a heads up, make yourselves familiar with layer mask. It's definitely something you're going to want to know. It'll save you lots of headaches in Photoshop and it'll make sure you get the most points possible too. So selections are great, but layer masks are what you do with those selections once you've made them. At least one of the things, one of the important things you can do. So looking at the slide here, on the left-hand side, there's a graphic. That's a screenshot of the layers panel. My layer 0 has a layer mask to the right of it. You see that thumbnail with a black ellipse in the middle? So that is a layer mask on my layer 1. My image in this case was just a white background. There's nothing interesting going on there. If it were a photo, you'd see a thumbnail of the photo or whatever else there, but it's a layer mask of a white background. And the mask works like this. Black reveals, well, I always get this backwards. White reveals, black conceals. White reveals, black conceals. So anytime I paint on my layer mask with the paintbrush, by filling in a marquee, using a gradient, whatever, I can make a selection essentially on that layer mask. And in this case, solid black circle in there knocks out or makes transparent whatever is on layer 0 in that area. As you can see with that next image over, see the checkerboard indicates transparency. That matches the ellipse that's drawn on my layer mask. So I didn't erase those pixels out. This is where we started getting to a concept called non-destructive editing. Very important to understand how to be non-destructive. I didn't delete any pixels from my image. If I want to modify this or undo it, I don't have to undo. I don't have to have 700 history states taking up all my system performance. I can simply paint back in with white on that area and the existing image is still there. It's just hidden by my layer mask. So layer masks are super, super helpful, and you should definitely become very familiar with how to use them. It's an important technique in compositing, which I'll get to later, and applying localized edits and adjustments and just generally something that you definitely need to be very familiar with is layer masks. We'll talk about it more. If you want to make a layer mask, all you have to do is make a selection, and then you can do a couple different things. So at the very bottom of your layers panel, you see the top right-hand side graphic. There's a red rectangle around a little icon that looks like a rectangle with a circle, kind of like what I showed you. That's a layer mask button. You click that, and whatever layer you're on, it's going to create a layer mask using the selection that you've already made. Below that, you can see if I go into the layer menu, I can create a new layer mask in a variety of different ways. We'll get to those later on, but there's lots of things you can do with layer masks. A very, very powerful feature of Photoshop. Go play around with it.